Hello and welcome to the Carbon Copy podcast. I'm Isabel Sparrow, and in this episode we are revisiting conversations with representatives involved with local council-led climate action, originally recorded during the Running Out of Time relay. We'll meet people in 4 different cities to hear about the successes and challenges of helping places to reduce emissions, and we'll hear from Climate Emergency UK about how their climate action scorecards are helping local authorities around the country improve and learn from one another. Carbon Copy is a UK charity inspiring big thinking local action for climate and nature. If you want to know more about what's happening where you live, there's a whole load of useful information on the local pages of our website. From climate action plans to emissions data, downloadable local warming stripes to inspiring initiatives nearby. If you're interested, check out the link in the show notes. Our first interview in this episode is with Climate Emergency UK's Partnerships Director, Isaac Beevor. He and I caught up as we walked along South Bank on the final day of the relay, so apologies for the background noise.
So my name is Isaac Beevor. I'm the Partnerships Director at Climate Emergency UK. So Climate Emergency UK have been going for about 5 years, and in that time we've been tracking and assessing councils' climate action across the UK. So we started off, as the name suggests, by creating a big map of all the climate emergency declarations from councils and collating all the declarations and publishing a model motion. We then moved on to work with My Society, the democracy tools experts, and created the Climate Action Plan Explorer, which was a big database of all local authorities' climate action plans and other data, including their net zero targets. And then we moved on to what we're known for, which is the council climate scorecards. We released the plan scorecards, which was the first assessment of council's climate action plans. And then we went on to release the first ever council climate action scorecards, which rated and assessed all UK councils on their climate action. And then we released that in October 2023.
And it is such an enormous piece of work.
Yes.
And it's so packed with information. How on earth did you go about doing that?
Yeah.
How long did it take? And are you going to do it again?
Yes, great questions. Yeah, it's a huge piece of work, and to be honest, we're a very small organisation, but we wouldn't be able to do this work without the support of the community that it really makes sure the scorecards can happen. So the scorecards are a 3-stage process. We have a first mark, right of reply, where councils can respond, and an audit process. In the first mark, we actually had just over 200 volunteers take part, giving up their evenings to mark council climate action, which I think is a sexy topic, but not everyone would.
No, not necessarily.
No. And we think that equated to about 5,000 volunteer hours over a 2-month period, which is just an insane amount of time of people giving up the time to mark and assess council climate action. But it also shows how interested people are in what their councils are doing to reduce emissions and tackle the climate and ecological emergency. We then moved on and we had the councils when they get involved in the right of reply, and we actually had 74% of UK councils actually respond in the right of reply, which is when they can provide any information or challenge any of the mark scoring given in the first mark. And then this is the crazy bit, we actually have people that from the first mark that come back to volunteer again in the audit process. So they've already been volunteers with us in the first mark. They then come back again to do the audit, where they basically award the final marks based on the first mark and the right of reply from the council. And so it took us from January right up until that marking process, up until August, so most of 2023.
Yeah.
And then we go into the launch period where we're preparing all the data and working out what's the data show us, what are the trends, where are councils performing well, where aren't they performing well, and what can we talk about basically.
Just because I don't want to stop you from running too long.
No, of course.
I had a question about what councils have. What the response from councils has been to the action scorecards, because you obviously mentioned that there was a stage where they got the right of reply.
Yes.
And then presumably there has also been some feedback since the final publishing as well.
Yeah.
So generally, has it been well received, or how's it gone?
Yeah, I think I'll be honest and say that it's a mixed reaction.
Yeah.
And sometimes that depends on how well the council has scored, depending on how their response is to us. But I think that a lot of council climate officers, a lot of councillors across the country understand the value of the scorecards in the sense that it's effectively for them a huge tool that compiles all the best practice from councils that hopefully others are encouraged to take, but also can just copy and take across to their councils. So that's one of the major benefits we see in terms of councils using the scorecards. But also we know that councils are taking an interest in it. We think about 1 in 5 councils are actually using or referencing the scorecards, and that's from looking at council meeting minutes where maybe councillors have asked questions in meetings, or they've referenced them in their climate action updates, or sometimes if they performed well they even put it in their job adverts.
Right.
Yeah, which is like we're one of the top scorers in the Climate Metrics UK scorecards. Like,
well,
come and work for us, which is something again we didn't expect as part of that. So it is encouraging. Obviously, there's parts of the methodology that some councils question or they don't particularly like, or we are trying to rate and assess councils across the UK, and sometimes some of the questions they may take they may not like, or they may think that it's not appropriate for them. But we think that broadly that the scorecards can have a really positive impact in terms of increasing that accountability, but also, as I said, in terms of compiling all that best practice that councils can then copy and paste and also encourage to take, because the scorecards provides that encouragement basically.
So, having heard from Isaac about the incredible in-depth work Climate Emergency UK has done to assess local councils, we're now going to hear from some of those councils themselves. First up, here's a conversation with Chris Common from Nottingham City Council.
Hi, I'm Chris Common. I'm the Carbon Neutral Policy Manager at Nottingham City Council. In essence, that means I programme manage the delivery of the council and city's ambition to become carbon neutral by 2028. So it's not just about working with the council services, it's about working with the whole city. If we make it, and that's the big if, but it would be the first UK city in the country to become carbon neutral. Some councils are going for carbon neutrality earlier, but this one is for the whole city by 2028. We know what our city's emissions are every year. We get figures from the government. Basically, the story of that is that the city has reduced its carbon emissions by 50% since 2005, which sounds impressive. So in 2005, the city was producing about 2 million tonnes of carbon a year, and now it's producing roughly 1 million tonnes. Now that sounds all fine, but that means we've got roughly 4 years to get rid of 1 million tonnes of carbon, and that's where it starts to get hard. We've got one of the best transport systems in the country, and been voted, but very popular buses, tram network. Outside of London, it's second to none. However, we've still got very congested roads. Transport roughly is about 30% of our emissions in the city, and that's flatlined over the last few years. That hasn't really changed. So there's a big push on, not just on electric cars, because electric cars bring their own particular issues, but it's getting people out of their cars is the key. Walking, cycling, what's so-called active transport or active travel. That is going to be key to the city and the council's policies over the next 4 years, is how do we do that? So the other two areas is where do we get our energy from? So most of us rely on the national grid. The national grid is only 40-50% from sustainable sources, and that's slowly decarbonising. But if we wait for the grid to decarbonise, which could be by the end of next decade, we think, sort of 2035 onwards, we're still leaving it a bit late. So we need to produce more sustainable energy from the council, within the council area. So more panels, more alternative power sources. We've got lots of panels. We're producing about 1 gigawatt of energy from panels, but we need another gigawatt to make it work. So we need to double the amount of solar panels on the roofs in the city. We've got a very progressive programme of what's called retrofitting our council properties. It's basically improving the energy efficiency of the property. So it's insulation, it's new windows, it's new doors, and all those things that will help bring down the energy use of that particular building. And we've done, the last figures I've seen is 7,000 improvements to about 2,000 or 3,000 properties in the city. Now that sounds an awful lot, but bearing in mind there's 150,000 properties in the city, and most of those are in private ownership. The good news is we're doing what we can on our own estate, and that should set an example to the others in the city. We're also decarbonising our fleet. About 50% of those are now what we class as ULEV, so ultra low energy vehicles or electric vehicles. So there are some good things happening. Everybody knows it's hard, but I think one of the things I was talking to some of our councillors was that they know it's difficult and they know it's probably something that we're going to miss, but it's about the ambition. It's about pushing ourselves. If we set an ambition for, say, 2035 or 2040 or even 2050 like the government are doing, we can actually sort of relax a bit and go, oh, well, we'll just do this gradually and slowly. By having a target like 2028, it injects a sort of an urgency to the problem, because it is an urgent thing.
I really loved hearing about the ambition in Nottingham. It's so important for all of us to move as fast as possible to tackle the climate and nature crises. Our next guest, Councillor Scott Arthur from Edinburgh City Council, is focused on sustainable transport in particular, and told us about a range of initiatives being deployed in the Scottish capital.
So I'm the Transport and Environment Committee convener here in Edinburgh, and I've been in that post since, I was appointed in May 2022. So there's a number of big challenges really in Edinburgh from a transport perspective, but obviously they're interlinked with other things. So that, Edinburgh's a really congested city. So some league tables put us, the most congested city in the UK, but we're certainly in the top 5. So that's where we are just now. In the city, we've just published our development plan called City Plan 2030, and in that there's a commitment to set aside land to build up to 37,000 houses over the next decade or so. So we're a congested city, and we're going to build 37,000 houses inside the city. And on top of that, we've got a commitment to reduce car miles driven in the city by 30%. There's great differences in Edinburgh in terms of inequalities. So if you're richer or poorer, the way you interface with the transport system is quite different. If you've got a mobility problem, you have real challenges moving around some parts of Edinburgh, and also where you live in the city is a bit of an issue. So we've got a fantastic bus network. But if I was to say that in Ratho, which is right at the edge of the city, or in Dummydikes, which is just outside the city centre, people would be furious with me because they don't feel well connected to that bus network. So there's an inequality there as well. So what we're trying to do right now is, cut congestion, accommodate that growth, reduce our emissions, tackle some of these inequalities, get people connected better, and take the city forward. But it's not easy. It's not easy. In Edinburgh, we're really unusual in a good way in that we own the public transport company, the bus company called Lothian Buses. They carry about 2 million passengers per week. So next month they'll take delivery of another 50 electric buses, and we've got a big launch for them. On top of that, our tram line, we extended that last year. It's now carrying about 1 million passengers per month. But obviously alongside that, we're investing quite heavily in active transport, particularly walking, connecting people up to that public transport network, and also cycling. So the ambition is that we have plans so that every household in the city is 200 to 400 metres away from a cycle network. And that cycle network is being deployed just now, but a lot of it's still at the planning stage, and we're still seeking funding from the Scottish Government to deliver that. The big thing we'll consult on this year will be the new tram line, which will go from the north of the city, it's a redevelopment area, Granton, where we're building 3,500 sustainable homes. Those homes will get their heat from a massive heat pump, which draws heat from a huge sewer that goes through the area. Yeah, it's really transformative work. So the tram will accelerate that development. It will connect to a local college, one of the biggest hospitals in the city, one of the biggest hospitals in Scotland actually, into the city centre, past Edinburgh University, past a shopping centre, and out to the biggest hospital in the city, and then out to one of the surrounding local authorities. So it's a huge project for the city. At one end you've got Granton, 3,500 houses, and at the other end you've got South East Edinburgh, where I think we're building 5,000 houses. So that tram it'll be fully complete, that line. It'll be completed in phases, but fully completed hopefully by 2035. So the line I use is that the passengers on that, a lot of them haven't been born yet, They'll be going to schools that haven't been built yet, and their parents will be living in houses with them that haven't been built yet, and they'll have jobs that don't even exist yet, because that's what that line is going to deliver. But something that probably excites me more than that is we have plans. So Edinburgh's kind of, its structure is kind of a hub and spokes, in terms of we have a city centre, old city centre, with arterial routes coming into it from a bypass that goes around the edge of the city. And so our idea is that for all these arterial routes coming in from surrounding local authorities, we've already got quite a lot of bus lanes and other mechanisms to support buses, but we're really going to accelerate that and build on that. So the idea is that, we're starting to do this already. Some of the buses will have technology on them so they can change the signals as they approach, etc. And the idea is through this is we improve bus journey times into the city by 25% and also improve reliability to make using the bus much more attractive, particularly if you're coming in from surrounding local authorities. I mean, looking outside the window just now, 37% of the cars in the city centre are coming from surrounding local authorities. So if we can make public transport more attractive to people, it will make a real difference in terms of the livability of our city, but also emissions and pollution in the city as well.
From one end of the country to the other, our next chat is with Kristina Downey at Portsmouth City Council.
My name is Kristina Downey and I lead climate change response at Portsmouth City Council, which essentially means that I have to help us as an organisation become net zero and ready for future climates, but also help the city on the same journey as well. I think we are similar to a lot of councils in that our strategic priorities are quite place-based, in that we're not a rural community. We're a very dense and highly urbanised coastal city. So our priorities are mainly focused around the majority of where our emissions occur, which is in homes and travel and transport as well. I think we're probably similar to a lot of councils out there in that we all declared a climate emergency a few years ago, and we're all now trying to work out how we can best get there. Historically, I think we've focused a lot of our priorities on those sort of, the term is the low-hanging fruit, where there are clear business cases to, with these solar panels, we know safely it's a low-risk project that will save this amount of money in this many years. But I think where we are at the moment is we're starting to move towards, we've taken all those options, and what's left is the more difficult decisions where we need to start looking at more innovative solutions and private sector involvement to try and come up with more solutions that don't always fit a clear business case. And I think that's probably where we are now. Yeah, we have a very ambitious target to be a net zero organisation by 2030, and also the city has the same 2030 target as well. I think we are making good headway in our organisational emissions, because that's the most control that we have over in what we do. We have less control and less influence in the city. We rely a lot on central government to pull those really big levers that we can't do in terms of regulations and big targets and funding. So the majority of Portsmouth is an island. We are one of the most densest areas in terms of people outside of inner city London. I'd say it's quite a working class city, a lot of historical areas with our dockyard, a lot of industrial areas associated with our port and our navy, and we have some really highly deprived inner city areas as well. We do have specific networking groups with our green community groups. We also have a group called the Portsmouth Green Partnership, which is made up of Portsmouth's largest employers and some of the influencers in that area that perhaps have more of an influence, because essentially we're all working on the same thing. We're trying to solve the same things in our organisation. And we see the value of collaborating on that, from basic, have we found a recycled printer supplier that works in all our printers? Just sharing that sort of local intel, local suppliers that are also focused on those net zero goals as well. We're a bit of an unusual council, I suppose, that we own and operate both the international ferry terminal, passenger terminal, and also the freight terminal as well. So we have influence there. We have one significant fund from central government to deliver shore power there, which means that visiting vessels can then plug in instead of using their engines, which not only reduces carbon emissions, but also improves air quality and noise. We've also been really successful in gaining over £12 million in funding from central government to deliver electric buses. And we have a fleet of electric buses which are replacing our diesel buses now, and they're just starting to be rolled out in Portsmouth, so you can see them about town. We have providers of scooters and electric bikes, rental bikes, car club, electric car club that's been rolled out as well. And these are all quite new. We're just testing the waters there with our private sector and to see how well they can be delivered. A lot of Portsmouth is terraced housing, so there isn't always the easy infrastructure for people to have bikes without sort of trailing it through their houses. So we have put out a lot of residential bike hangers that everyone can take advantage of. This summer, we are undertaking a citywide tree survey to work out how many trees we actually have in Portsmouth and the benefits those trees are having as well, try and quantify those benefits to our city. And we're very proud that we have been declared a new tree city of the world. Now, trees are really important for us now because we are a really dense urban city. Those trees are really important, not just for our sort of well-being or biodiversity, but also in terms of changing climates as well, reducing our urban heat island effect in those big inner city areas. And also frequently we get extreme rainfalls here as well, and to try and suck up and slow some of that rainfall to make sure that we don't experience flooding.
Climate resilience is so important. We're already feeling the effects of climate change here in the UK, so not only do we need to reduce emissions, but also to put measures in place to help our communities live safely and comfortably, even in the face of extreme weather. This resilience is something I discussed with our next and final guest, Jacob Heitland of Newham Council.
So my name is Jacob Heitland. I'm Director of Climate Action at Newham Council in London. We're a relatively new department, only set up February of 2023, responsible really for, I think, building the capacity of the council and of the borough and of London to really be working on the interconnected crises that the climate emergency presents, especially at a local level in an urban environment such as Newham, such as London. This is really looking at, of course, decarbonisation to hit our net zero targets, but at the same time, we must be looking at the resilience of the climate issues that are already present, extreme heat, flooding, etc., and compounding that through the lens of equity, which we already have extreme inequity in this country, which has been worsening in recent years. And we've got really stark deprivation levels, poverty levels in Newham. People are really struggling with the cost of living crisis, with things like fuel poverty. We quite swiftly said, okay, we have to look at this from a different lens. And we looked at it through various things. And actually, coincidentally, last year, the GLA, there was a bit of work that came out around declaring a need for a just transition in London. So that this transition to a net zero economy must be just. We cannot have a repeat of sort of Thatcher's 80s, coal mines shutting down and leaving whole towns, without their livelihoods. So we know we need to have everyone kind of benefiting on this journey. And at the same time, even if we waved a magic wand and made the UK net zero tomorrow, we are still going to have extreme heat. We're still going to have extreme flooding. Air pollution's on the rise. So these are things that are already baked into the increase in carbon in the atmosphere that we're seeing. There's an incredible labyrinth of passionate people across East London who care and are working on this. A complex labyrinth that I cannot even sort of fully map out as much as we try and we want to. And I think our approach to this, I'll be brutally honest, is that last year when we were making the plan, I started in February and it got approved at Cabinet in December, which is a very fast for local government. And actually what I took into that and what we built into that from a community perspective is that there've been loads of work. There've been citizen assemblies on the topic, just a year and a half before I started. And, they were pretty much 85% complete climate action plans in terms of what they developed. And I think we've gone past this sort of zeitgeist of we know what needs doing. The scientists are telling us, I'm actually quite frustrated that the onus is still on individual people. We need to frame the question and move the questioning away from, what do you think about climate change, to, hey, we know that flooding is an issue on your street. Is there a particular area in your street where you think it's best we could actually dig up some cement and make a rain garden or some sustainable urban drainage? And we have to bring it back down to a much more micro level. The other things that we just had a schools conference. So we had a conference with head teachers, and we had 4 students come up from primary school and talk about all the initiatives they're doing at one particular, I think it was Star Lane Primary. And it almost brought me to tears because these like 6 or 7 year old kids were so eloquently describing, walk to school days, meat free Mondays, and these different initiatives. And they were taking the onus on themselves, that no small action, should kind of go unaccredited. And I think I asked them a question about what do you do when someone doesn't want to do that? And they go, oh, well, we just talk to them about their concerns. And usually after a while, they understand and they join us. I mean, we've got an incredible education network across Newham. We've got over 100 schools which have really high attainment levels because of investment in education. We've got UCL that's just moved onto the Olympic Park. We've got University of East London, Newham College. And I think there's an incredible amount happening across this kind of network of people, both in education institutions, but people on the ground. We've got a program called People Powered Places that we're kind of interfacing with, which is lots of organizations that are bidding for money from the government for them to decide how to spend it, whether it be in community gardens or investment community centers, etc. So it's interesting because when you talk to real people on the ground, it's never like, I'm here because of climate change. It's kind of like, I'm here to make my neighborhood better. And that might be a sort of net zero action, if you want to call it that. And I think what we're really finding from a narrative perspective, again, with retrofit as an example, I was talking to someone about retrofit and they thought I was talking about buying secondhand clothing. And it really brings home that the language is so, really isolating, I think, really exclusionary language that we've used in the climate space. And when we're talking about retrofit as an example, we're going to start talking about healthy homes. If we're going to talk about climate, it should be the last bullet point of our argumentation. And oh, by the way, this is also good for, our net zero targets or for climate change. Just say it how it is. Just use really normal day language. We're all human beings. I think sometimes we come into work and then we start using big fancy language. But actually, this is really just about normal, healthy neighborhoods. I always say too, if you do well by people, you're usually going to do well by the planet and vice versa.
Some really important insights there. We hope you found this collection of conversations as interesting as we have. For more information about any of today's guests, check out the show notes. And to hear more from the pod, just search Carbon Copy Podcast on all the usual platforms. Thank you to all our guests, and thanks to you for listening. The Carbon Copy Podcast is written and presented by me, Isabel Sparrow. Our producer and editor is Bradley Ingham. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our final special themed episode in this series. So until then, goodbye.